Okay, I think we will go ahead and get started since it's 12:01. So good afternoon. Thank you for joining us today. This is Michelle McNerney from Iowa Workforce Development. I believe I've talked to many of you individually or in group settings at the meetings and trainings that we've had over the past 9 months or so as we work towards WIOA compliance in Iowa. So thank you for joining. What we're going to do is hopefully start a series of biweekly calls over lunch to give you as CEOs a chance to hear questions that have been asked, a chance for us to review any guidance that we've sent out, and also give you a chance to ask us any questions. So I'm just going to go through. I have a little bit of a slideshow. If you were able to log on the computer, you should be able to see that. If you are joining us on the phone, we are recording these calls and we will be posting them to the State Workforce Development Board website, where we've posted the other tools and guidance that we've put out. So you will be able to view the slideshow at a later date as well. Let's go through here. So just as a reminder, my contact information, if you don't already have it, is included in the slide. And again, we just wanted to try to figure out a way that we can give you the opportunity to connect with us, to ask questions. You know, right now, obviously, everybody's focus has shifted a little bit to dealing with the coronavirus pandemic, and we are well aware of that. So, you know, I sent out an email about it yesterday afternoon, but I just want to reiterate that, you know, we're going to continue to push out the guidance and continue to work forward. And we encourage you to do the same things, but we also completely understand that everybody's focus is elsewhere. So we are going to be as flexible as we possibly can as we work towards these goals together, and we'll just kind of keep moving forward. So hopefully this gives us a good place to continue that dialogue as we help you to move forward in your local areas. So each meeting that we have, we will go over just a couple standard items. We'll review the timeline and any upcoming due dates, which obviously we have some updates to right now. Go over any guidance we've recently issued, and also put up a list of questions we've received in email. Most of the time when we receive those questions, we respond back to just the person who asked the questions. So this will be an opportunity for us to provide those questions and answers to all of you. And then we also will move forward with opening it up for questions and answers from you during the call. So what's on the screen now is the task list and the deadline list that details out the CEO key deliverables and the timeline. And as you know, we were operating on a deadline of May 15th of 2020 for US CEOs to put in place the fundamental foundational tasks to move your local areas towards compliance, whether that's in your existing local area or whether you have worked with other local areas to combine and create a new local area. So hopefully you all received the email that I sent out yesterday afternoon. We have reached out to the Department of Labor. Obviously, again, with everything going on with the coronavirus, our skills and attention is needed elsewhere. So DOL has assured us that they are going to be flexible in this timeline and these deadlines. And if you remember correctly, the deadline of May 15th was put in place by the state based on guidance received from the Department of Labor Region 5 office that we needed to be moving forward as of July 1st in some capacity with realignment. So, you know, I will encourage you again, if you are already working towards, especially in those areas that are working towards realigning, to continue that work. In whatever guidance and assistance you need, we will make sure that you get it. But if you also are going to struggle to meet these deadlines, then I really encourage you to reach out to myself or Mike Witt, Linda Rouse, Renee Slagle. Those are probably other people from IWD. If you can hear my dog barking in the background, I'm sorry. I'm at home working right now, as I'm sure many of you are. And we will help you figure out how we can adjust these deadlines. So we have not specifically adjusted the deadlines on the timeline yet, but I will just continue to stress that flexibility is there, and we will work with you to get your area to the point where we can change the deadlines if necessary. So let's just look at first some of the latest guidance that we've issued or announcements that we've made. Again, looking at the flexibility on the deadlines, just communication is going to be key as we work through all of this together. So I just can't stress that enough. And the other big announcement that I want to just make is that there is a lot of questions that are coming in related to the fiscal agent. And, this is a little bit of a new territory for us in Iowa because we haven't had designated fiscal agents in the past that were separate from the service providers. So there are a lot of questions. And one of the things that we are working on is expanding our contract with mayor and mayor to include specific training and resources around the fiscal agent issue. So that's something that we're in the middle of right now, and we hope to have in place soon. And I do just want to let you know that the next scheduled office hours meeting, which is scheduled for April 3rd at noon in the same format, we are going to be devoting that to all of the fiscal agent issues. And hopefully that will answer a lot of those questions for you. If you have questions about fiscal agents today, please ask them. I'm not sure I'll be able to provide an answer today, but if I can get them jotted down, I can also be prepared to answer them on the next call. So those are the major announcements for this week. And so let me dive into the questions and answers that we've received to this point that we wanted to share with everyone. And once we've gotten through that piece, we'll open it up for questions to you all. So, and there's my y'all because Lori's on the line and I speak like I'm from Kentucky when I'm with her.
I'm so proud.
Okay. All right. So again, I just keep getting ahead of myself on this PowerPoint, don't I? We will talk about fiscal agent questions at the April 3rd office hours. So one of the questions, and I am going to read the questions out loud because we do have several people who are attending on the phone right now. So the first question is the service provider required to submit documentation of expenses along with requests for reimbursement? The answer is yes. The local board through the fiscal agent will require itemized reporting and documentation from the service provider to ensure that funds are being spent properly. And this is no different than what would be expected now. All expenses have to have documentation associated with them. There is an IWD policy that discusses this, and this would be policy 1.3.1.0, local fiscal agent required functions. Again, we can get into detail more about this next week or in 2 weeks when we dive into the fiscal agent stuff a little bit more. But yes, all expenses require documentation. Okay. Next question, does the fiscal agent serve as employer of record to the board staff? So if you remember correctly, IWD and through the state workforce development approved state policy that does not allow the same entity to perform the role of fiscal agent and staff to the board. So in that sense, the employer of record for the board staff will follow similar invoicing procedures as a service provider, and that whoever that board staff person works for, that's their employer of record, and they would invoice for their services to the local board to be paid out of the administration funds that are available. The IWD firewalls policy reiterates, and that's where you can find the language about those 4 main job roles of fiscal agent, staff to the board, service provider, and one-stop operator, and which entities can and can't perform multiple functions within that. So hopefully that answers that question. All right, next question was, must the fiscal agent be located in the local workforce development area? The answer is no. There's no requirement by law that the fiscal agent is located in the local development area. And just additionally, it is allowable for one entity to serve as a fiscal agent to multiple, local workforce development areas. That fiscal agent would just have to ensure that they were tracking separately and reporting separately on funds for the different local areas. But you could, in essence, be using the same fiscal agent for multiple local areas if that's what you chose to do. And it does not have to be located within the local area. The law does require that the one-stop operator is located within the local workforce development area, but currently Iowa has a waiver of that requirement. That waiver is good right now through June 30th of 2020, so this year. but when we submitted our state plan, we did ask for that waiver to be extended for the next 2 program years as well. So when we receive approval of our state plan back, we'll know whether we were granted that waiver again going forward beyond June 30th. So we'll keep you posted on that. Okay, the next section of topics for questions were related to the CEO shared liability agreements, which I think many of you are currently working on. The question is, are CEO shared liability agreements required to include an expiration date? And this actually came up because there is a local area that has submitted a CEO agreement for review. And in reviewing that, we just need to remind everybody that in Iowa, what is referred to as a CEO shared liability agreement in WIOA is known as a 2080 agreement in Iowa, right? I think you guys are all aware of that. So while the agreement does not have to have an expiration date, it can have an expiration date, and your CEO agreements or 2080 agreements need to clearly state either way if it does have an expiration date or it does not. So you just want to make sure that when you're submitting that, you either put in there the date that the agreement is good through, or you indicate that it is ongoing and there is no expiration date. And again, anytime we're talking about these documents, these CEO shared liability agreements or fiscal agent agreements, any type of agreements that you're working on for your local area, we are highly encouraging you to seek input and review from your county attorneys regarding compliance with Iowa code and anything, you know, legally binding that you're working on. So we just want to remind you of that as well. Okay, the next topic is over local workforce development board membership. Question is, may the CEOs add to the conflict of interest form or create its own form? So if you remember correctly, we did send out a template for a conflict of interest form to be used for all local workforce development board members. That is just a suggestion. You are not required to use it. You can create your own conflict of interest form to be used by your local board members. But we do need to remind you that any form you create has to adhere to the conflict of interest policy that we've established. And that's within the WIOA e-policy manual at policy 1.4.1.2, submission of appointments. I think that what is a good sort of guide stick for you to use is the template that we've put out is going to cover all the minimum requirements that you need to have in a local workforce development board conflict of interest form. So if you want to create your own, make sure that everything that's in the template that we provided is included in your own, and then you should probably be good to go with regards to meeting those requirements that are in the policy. The next set of topics is related to local workforce development board bylaws. Whose responsibility is it to draft the bylaws for the local board? And so just as a reminder, per WIOA, it's the role of you, the chief elected officials, to draft the bylaws for the local board. And I just want to stress, because we have been getting some questions, that it is not appropriate for your current service provider or any other entity to be drafting those bylaws on your behalf. It really is something that you should be doing because those bylaws should guide how that board fulfills the strategic plan that you as CEOs have for your local area. So just make sure that you're giving your input on those bylaws. And there are, again, policies within that WIOA e-policy manual that detail very clearly what should be at a minimum included in your bylaws for your local area. Okay, the next question is, are service providers required members of the local workforce development board? And just as a reminder to all of you that we sent out the guidance that was about all surrounding local workforce development board composition. We included an Excel worksheet that really helps you to be able to ensure that your board meets both federal and state requirements when it comes to board composition. So that's a really good tool for you to use. But this question relates back to your service provider. So right now they would be referred to as your Title I director, most likely. So the answer to the question is that WIOA nor Iowa policy calls for service providers to serve on the local workforce development board. And, you know, in most instances, not in most instances, sorry, let me rephrase this. The Title I service providers are the people that you will, or the entities that you will be issuing RFPs to be contractors of the local board to provide the services that need to be provided through WIOA. The composition spreadsheet that we sent you, if you have the minimum number of required seats on your board, does not include a seat for your Title I service provider. If you choose to add a seat for your Title I service provider to be on your local board, then you would have to follow the guidelines to add additional seats to your board to ensure the 50% minimum requirement of business members as well. And also you would be having to pay very close attention to conflict of interest issues. So if you do put a service provider on your local workforce development board, that person would need to recuse herself or himself from any votes, decisions, or actions pertaining to the service provider to make sure that there was no conflicts of interest. So hopefully that clears that up. And I do really think that the guidance we sent out regarding local workforce development board composition is very comprehensive. So I would really encourage you to review that guidance as well. Okay, the next section of topics is about open meetings. And the question that was submitted is, are CEOs required to adhere to open meetings when conducting WIOA related business? And I think we've covered this pretty well, but the answer is yes. You as CEOs will want to make sure that you're following all sunshine laws when you're conducting WIOA related business and decisions. So, okay, so the screen's showing that we're going to wrap up. It up for questions to you all. I just want to remind you that you can continue to submit questions to IWD through myself, through Renee, Linda, and Mike, and we will get you those answers as quickly as possible, and also continue to post them in this format on the State Workforce Development Board website. And one more time, if I haven't said this enough, we will continue to focus on fiscal agent questions at our next CEO office hours meeting on April 3rd. And with that, I'm going to open it up. Oh, just as a reminder too, here's our contact information if you do need to submit any questions. And I will open it up for questions live on the call if anybody has any. You should have the ability to go ahead and unmute yourself.
Michelle, this is Jim Irwin. Can you hear me?
Yep.
So I have a question. You had a comment about a Title I, your Title I educator. If they're on your board, I want to clarify. If we put them on our board as one of our, is it 17 or 19 individuals, now we have to add an additional person to offset them, or they just have to recuse themselves? I just want to get clarification on that.
Right, and Lori, please jump in and make sure I'm answering this correctly. But if you look at that board composition worksheet, and we could probably try to pull this up at the next meeting as well, or Wendy, if you have it and you could pull it up, we could switch and share your screen. But the law is very prescriptive about what the seats, what entities are represented to make up the minimum requirements of seats. And one of the seats is designed for and I'm not going to say this exactly right, so Lori, you might dive in and say it for me, but it's designed for a position of higher education, somebody representing higher education, which could be a community college. For example, in your Region 9 currently, the community college is the service provider, right? But when you look at that seat position, and you also look at the further definitions that are required to fill those seats, is designed to be somebody with decision-making authority for that entity, right? So you're most likely talking about a chancellor or a president or a provost or something like that filling that seat, not the Title I service provider. Does that make sense? So if you filled all of those seats that are on their minimum requirement, and that there isn't one listed for the Title I service provider, whether it's filled by a community, whether your service provider currently is a community college, whether it's a COG, whether it's a community action agency, it's just doesn't fit. So you would have to add an additional board seat to have that Title I service provider sitting on your board. And if you did that, you would offset the minimum 50% business. So you would have to at least add another business to get you back to having a minimum of your board be business members. Did I say that right, Lori?
You did. Yeah. Jim, does that answer your question, or?
I think, well, so I'm just going to use this as an example. So, I mean, Eastern Iowa Community College is probably not going to be our Title I going forward, but if they were their Title I, currently it would be Paula, would be that person, but the seat would have to actually be held by the chancellor of the college. So, but I don't.
Yes. Correct. And so as it stands right now, let's assume that your service provider is not the community college. As it stands right now, there is not, and you're only going, and we're assuming this, you're only going with the minimum seats on the board. There is no seat for your service provider. There is not a requirement for the service provider to be on the board. And it is honestly a best practice in a lot of places that the service provider is, quite frankly, not on the board. But because community colleges often fill the higher education seat that is on the board, if your community college is going to fill that seat, then that needs to be somebody, as Michelle was saying, that's higher up in the institution that can make decisions for the institution. It would not be the person filling the role as the Title I service director if that is who ends up being your service provider. So there's a separation there of those duties, and that's okay.
Okay, can I have a follow-up question with that?
Yes, we will allow a follow-up question.
Okay. There's a potentially with our combining of the two regions to make one area, we have one community college that is interested in being the Title I provider. And so but my question is, if we would have the other community college that's in our area, if we would have them, their chancellor on our seat, sit on our board, if they're that, my question is, if the other Title I provider, the other community college, would contract with that current community college to do some Title I education in our area, now would that create an issue? It probably would. It'd be a conflict of interest for that chancellor.
I don't necessarily think so, because what you're going to do is you're going to have roles and responsibilities clearly outlined in writing and agreed to. You know, the community colleges, no matter where you go, are a vital part of the workforce system, and that is why they often fill this higher education seat. So I wouldn't say that it is automatically a conflict of interest, no. But in order to do that, I think it would be prudent that those things are outlined, and that, you know, where there are potential conflicts of interest, that a person recuse themselves from a vote, and those sorts of things. But
okay, that sounds perfect. Thank you very much.
Okay, you're welcome.
And I'm just going to add on, Jim, really quickly. You know, it doesn't have to be a community college. It is, like Lori said, typically, because they're such a vital role, and they're typically providing much of the education and training that happens and things like that. But if you, and I'm not super familiar with Davenport and the eastern side of the state for colleges, but like take, for example, Region 10 in the Iowa City area. You have Kirkwood, you have the University of Iowa, you have multiple schools, right, that could fill that seat on the board. What you as CEOs, what the CLEO's responsibility to do is to appoint somebody from one of those institutions to fill that role. You may decide at your local board that you want one from every one of those institutions on your board. So you can add a seat for the president of the University of Iowa and the president of Kirkwood. But if you add a seat for a second institution of higher education, you then also are going to have to look at adding additional business seats to maintain that balance of the majority of the members being business. So you have flexibility there. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Yep. So perfect. Thank you very much for both of you. Yep.
Yeah. Any other questions?
Lori, I guess I have a question. This is Darren.
Hi, Darren.
Hello. If we do add another person on there, is there like a rounding rule? Let's say we end up with 50.8% on the in the business representatives. What I mean, because once you add one person, it's going to screw up all of your percentages. So is there a rounding up rule or something that we can?
I will deflect to Michelle on that. That would be a state that would be a state decision, but I'm going to tell you the law says a minimum 51%.
Okay.
So I cannot imagine that anything less than 51% is what you would want to do.
Okay.
That's why that membership, you're right, and we've talked about this till I know a lot of you all are really tired of hearing me say it, but you know, anytime you add seats, it really causes you to need to add probably 2 other seats in most cases, because with that minimum board number, you're barely meeting the 51%. So whenever you add a non-business person, it really puts that in jeopardy.
Below that, yeah.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great, thank
Yeah,
you.
and that's another good use, Darren, of that spreadsheet that we sent you. You can add lines, and the formulas that are built in will tell you whether you've added enough positions to still meet the minimum requirements or not. It's not probably 100% perfect, but it's darn close. So, and then what you also have, again, with our state, remember, is the requirements for the boards to be no more than half+1 based off gender and political affiliation, which makes it even more difficult. So, yeah. Any other questions we can help answer today?
Hey, Michelle, this is Kyle.
Hi.
I was curious, has there been a response or answer to Barry's question the other day about the local board membership that was filled by state staff?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I responded just to Barry because it was specific to his local area. But so what happened is the Wagner-Peiser representative is always going to be a state staff person, and the person retired from that local area, the manager of Wagner-Peiser staff in his region. So there is a person that is covering the duties in that area right now. So she's going to be assigned to that local board until they can find somebody to permanently fill that position. But you know, that's, and I also told him he's not out of compliance. He can't control that, and we understand. So, but we're working to get that filled very quickly for him.
Okay, yeah, that was my question. I just wanted to make sure we were not going to have compliance affected by that. So,
Nope.
sounds
nope.
good.
Hey, Michelle, it's Wendy. There were 2 other questions that came through the chat. It looks like Lori answered the one from John. I don't know if we want to talk about those. So
Yeah, because there are people that have dialed in. So let me
Yeah.
just here.
Yep. So the one from John was about mergers, and I can read it, or if you want to open
Yeah, I
it.
found it here. So
Cool.
John had asked a question about in the regional mergers, are all counties required to approve the mergers on both sides? So the answer is yes. So if you have an existing local area that has 5 counties in it and only 4 have agreed to join with another local area, then unfortunately you cannot join. All of the counties individually have to agree to joining with another local area for you to be able to accomplish that. So if, yes, John, if one county objects, it's a no-go, unfortunately. And I guess what I would encourage you to do is reach out to myself, Mike, Ronee, or Linda. And if we can get that one county on the phone and figure out why they're objecting, and if there's a way we can work to explain things further, we are more than happy to do that. And then you said there was another question, Wendy?
Yep, it was the first one from Scott on, I'm guessing, ex officio numbers.
Oh, okay.
Can you elaborate on what that question, what does that question mean?
Yeah, I'm not sure either.
With the local board, with the local workforce board membership, as it comes into law and as it's been solidified in Iowa policy, there is not a role for ex officio members. They do have them on the state board, but there aren't any on local boards. The CEOs could make a decision to add ex officio, and that's not been a question that has come up. So Scott, if you want to elaborate on that a little bit, and maybe we could better answer that question for you, I'd be happy to.
Yeah, and it looks like he's asking in regards to the Title I directors. The one thing I would want to do, Scott, I want to look at the state code again, because as Lori mentioned, our state board has ex officio members, but I think that is codified in Iowa code. I'm not sure it is for local boards, so I need to double check. So I will look at that and send something out in email to you guys regarding ex officio members on local boards.
Let me add something to that. So in a lot of other places with local boards, what you would see happen is the entities that are contractors of the local boards, which is what a service provider is going to be, they're going to be a contractor. You wouldn't have those contractors sitting on the board. You would have those contractors absolutely coming to local board meetings. Heck, you might even, and I'm talking about the board meetings of the local workforce board, not the group of CEOs. The local workforce board chair may even have that service provider give a report out at a local board meeting, but they are working for the board, carrying out the vision of the board. So having them also as a board member automatically creates at least a perception of a conflict of interest. So.
Okay, any other, oops, did I mute my, no, I didn't, okay. Are there any other questions we can answer today?
Hi, Michelle. This is Miranda from Region 16.
Hi.
Hi. I have a question regarding the funding at the end of this fiscal year, since our regions, Region 9 and 16, are intending on combining. One email you sent out told us to let you know whether we wanted to carry over or recapture the funding, and I was curious of how that's going to work, or how that should work with our regions combining.
Michelle, are you on mute?
Gosh, sorry. Yep, I'm just chatting away at myself. Sorry. So it's not necessarily a question of whether you want the funds to be carried over or recaptured. It's going to depend on how you choose to deal with the existing contracts, right? So if you're going to extend the existing service provider contracts to go beyond June 30th to be able to use any additional funds, or to be able to help facilitate the transition of service providers or whatever that looks like in your local area, then for the most part, they will expend everything and there will not be a need to recapture. They're only allowed to carry over 20% of what they received during the previous year. And so one of the things that I'm working on currently is a report for all of the local areas for you as CEOs and for the service providers for where they're at budget-wise at this point in the year and what their projection looks like for how much funding they would possibly be carrying over if they would continue to spend at the rate they're currently spending. And then that will allow you as CEOs, I think, to also help maybe make some decisions budget-wise and kind of guide the service providers of what you want that to look like. If you have a service provider who is walking away on July 1st and has indicated that they don't want to continue to be the service provider, they have 45 days to close out that grant that they have the contract with and the grant funding with currently. At the end of that 45 days, what has not been expended, we will automatically recapture and then redistribute it to the local area through the new fiscal agent or through a new contract with the new service provider. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and that's our situation, I believe. Since we're combining regions, the one current service provider is, I think they've said they are done as of July 1st.
Right.
And we're putting out RFP for all programs here in a couple weeks. So.
Okay. Yeah. So I think, again, we can just kind of continue to be talking about that. And if we need to have specific conversations related to your local area, then we can definitely do that to make sure that we know exactly what's going on and put down a plan in writing for what that will look like. Then I'm more than willing to do that. So, and Kyle just reminded me as well. Thank you, Kyle, because I actually had a note for this, but I got ahead of myself. So regarding the funding that I just mentioned, so I'm working with our financial team and doing those calculations to give you a look at what your current budgets look like and what you're estimated to be at the end of the year. As well as that, I've had a couple of questions from different CEOs regarding the funding allocation formula. And I actually have a draft email I'm working on and then to send that out to everybody. And then things have gotten a little crazy, as you can imagine, with in regards to the coronavirus, and we've sort of shifted to that. So I will try to get that out to you guys early next week as well. The funding allocation formula spreadsheets show the data that is provided by the Labor Market Information Division that's used in the calculation. And we can take some time on our next office hours call to walk through that and answer any questions that you might have, because it is extremely complicated and I'm not sure that I will be able to answer questions via email very successfully. So let's plan on that information coming out in the next week or so, and then we can review it on our April 3rd conference call. Thank you. Any other questions today?
Hi, Michelle, it's Miranda again. I think you probably have answered this in my emails, but will you be providing like sample service provider contracts or providing guidance on how to formulate those moving forward?
Yeah, we're trying. I've reached out to several other states to get some examples from them. And again, we're just all hands on deck with coronavirus, which I know makes it very difficult for you guys to move forward. So trying to balance that a lot, and I appreciate your patience. You know, the contracts, let me just answer with yes, we are going to try our best to give you that.
Okay.
Any other questions today?
This is Darren again. Any big changes at workforce development due to this coronavirus that we should be aware of? I'm sure they're going to be bombarded and overloaded with
Yeah,
unemployed
that's
people.
actually a really great question, Darren. And so let me just give you kind of an update as to where I'm at right now. As you guys can imagine, with the amount of temporary layoffs that are happening, let's hope they're all temporary layoffs, but our unemployment insurance division is just absolutely bombarded. It is all hands on deck. There are some of my staff that have been pulled off to try to answer UI calls and answer claims. Mike's team from the AJC division, I think, has 126 people going through mandatory training today and all day tomorrow on their Saturday to get trained on unemployment, to be able to assist answering calls so that we can get claims processed as quickly as possible and money to people as quickly as possible. So that's been really the number one goal of the agency. So at the same time of trying to maintain services for everybody, also trying to maintain the health and safety of our own employees. We have spent much of this week ramping up the ability to telework, which is maybe why you might have heard my dog barking earlier. Most staff by the end of this week, I believe, Mike, if you can correct me if I'm wrong, especially from a UI perspective, if they can work remote, they will be working remote. Thankfully, our IT team has done a phenomenal job of ensuring everybody has the connections and the hardware and software they need to be able to maintain that even if they are working remotely. Just today, our AJCs did close to public interaction and preventing people from actually entering the center. Doors are not locked. There is a staff person standing at the front door of every AJC, answering questions, taking information from people. People need the ability to be able to turn in documentation of identity and things like that to be able to get their unemployment and their benefits. So we're maintaining that. We're asking that all services be provided remotely if at all possible. But customers do still have the ability to request an in-person meeting if absolutely necessary. So we're trying to maintain those services as best as we possibly can. Mike, what am I forgetting? Do you want to dive in and add anything?
No, I think that's pretty good. It's all limited in person, and the majority of unemployment can be done over the phone or online. We're helping customers to actually file their claims over the phone through our staff. And so we have staff from the field that are teleworking, but the majority are working in the centers with a staff person at the door and doing our best to provide everything that we can remotely as possible. Are you on mute, Michelle?
Okay, this is Lori. I'll go. So are there any other questions that you all wanted to raise today? As you're thinking about that, if any come up, please be sure and reach out to Michelle or Linda or Renee or Mike, because as you can see, what we're trying to do is begin answering the questions in a format like this so everybody has benefit of the question and the answer. So please be sure and get with one of them. You can send emails or pick up the phone or whatever. As Michelle mentioned, we will go into a lot of detail in 2 weeks around fiscal agents and what that means for you all as CEOs, and those sorts of things. So as you all think about that, because I know that you all have a ton of other things on your plate right now and normally, but just be thinking about that. We'll have the opportunity to go into it and begin to get those questions answered for you. Michelle? Well, I think Michelle perhaps maybe has lost connectivity. Are you there?
I think I'm still here.
Okay.
Okay, I'm sorry. I just keep maybe doing the mute button backwards. I don't know. I just want to say that obviously this is a new avenue for us to communicate with all of you and be able to interact and get answers to questions out there. So if you have any feedback about whether this was a good format and you liked it, or if there's anything you would like to see different, please let me know. This is for you. We want to make sure we're communicating with you and giving you the information you need. So any feedback would be greatly appreciated. You can shoot me an email or anything like that. And it doesn't sound like there are any more questions today. So thank you all. I know you're all very busy. I hope this was helpful, and we will plan on talking to you again in 2 weeks. Thank you.
Thank you.